The quilt still smelled like him. Cedarwood and the faintest touch of pipe tobacco. I pulled it up higher beneath my chin, even though the room wasn't cold. That scent, it held stories. Mornings with Henry reading the paper, legs crossed just so, glasses slipping down his nose while he made those small, thoughtful sounds as he turned each page. He never rushed the news, never rushed me either. I let my eyes rest half shut, caught between sleep and sunrise. The blue light filtering through the blinds painted soft lines across the couch and across my skin. I remember thinking, maybe I'll just stay here a few more minutes. Maybe the house would let me have a little peace before the day got noisy. The eyes. Kitchen was already murmuring, the low hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug. I didn't mind the sounds. Not yet, but then I heard her voice. Honestly, she's just dead weight now. It was casual, careless. Like she was talking about a broken lamp or last week's mail, and then silence, followed by the scrape of a chair. That quilt I had pulled tight for comfort now felt heavy, stifling. The warmth I'd been wrapped in, gone in a blink. I heard her say it plain as anything. Dead weight. And my body. Didn't flinch, but everything inside me curled. My breath caught. It wasn't the kind of gasp you make when you're startled. It was quiet, pressed down so tightly it barely escaped. I didn't want them to know I'd heard. I wasn't ready for that. So I stared at the ceiling. The pattern on it, the little bumps and swirls, suddenly looked unfamiliar, like I was lying in a stranger's house. I remember counting the shadows cast by the blinds, 1, 2, 3, as if that might steady the hurt. She didn't say it with hate. That almost made it worse. She said it like a fact, like observation. And my son? He didn't say a word. That's what hurt the most. Not an insult. Not even the way she sighed afterward. Like I was a to-do list item she didn't sign up for. It was the silence from him. My boy, who used to bring me rocks from the garden like treasure, once cried when I scraped my hand on a nail. He was quiet now. The spoon clinked again in the kitchen. I heard the faint shuffle of chairs, maybe the newspaper being opened. All so normal. But nothing about that moment felt normal to me. It felt like a little part of me folded up and disappeared. Not out of anger, but mourning. I wasn't just lying still. I was grieving something I hadn't known was gone until it didn't speak up for me. The scent of coffee drifted through the archway like it always did. Dark roast, sharp, earthy. I used to love that. Smell. It meant mornings with Henry on the porch. Him reading the news, me knitting or humming along to the oldies on the radio. Sometimes he'd nudge the cup toward me and say, "Smell that? That's how a home should wake up." But this morning, the smell felt different. I don't know how a smell can feel lonely, but it did. That bitter roast sat heavy in my chest, almost sour, like something oversteeped, overused. I let the scent settle in my throat and wished I hadn't. My stomach turned. The birds were chirping outside. That spring kind of chirp, like they were proud of the sun for coming back. It used to cheer me, that sound. Today, it just sounded too far away. There was no clink of Henry's spoon, no "good morning, darlin'," just voices in the kitchen that didn't belong to that memory. My son said something low. She answered, louder. I didn't catch the words this time. I didn't need to. The coffee kept drifting in like a memory that wouldn't land right. I thought about crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just letting a tear or two fall, just to ease the tightness in my throat. But I didn't move. Not yet. I stayed still, waiting for something to shift. The smell of the coffee, the sound of a voice saying, "Sorry, Mom," anything, but all that came was silence and the sting of coffee that no longer comforted. I didn't move. Not because I couldn't, but because I needed to stay still or I might shatter. It wasn't fear exactly. It was preservation, like when a bird goes quiet after a branch snaps. The quilt wrapped around me like a shell, warm but fragile. I listened to the breeze tickle the curtains, watched the golden light slowly stretch across the rug. It was the kind of morning light that used to mean pancakes and newspaper clippings and laughter. Now, it just showed the dust. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything I couldn't say. I let it hold me. I let it keep me from falling apart. I could hear them in the kitchen, still moving, still existing in a world that no longer seemed to include me. And I wondered, when did I become someone they talked about instead of talked to? I remember thinking, if I stay quiet, maybe I can figure out where I went. I heard the fridge door open, the tap of something against the counter. But I didn't focus on that. I focused on my own breath. In, out, shallow and slow. Like when Henry used to fall asleep beside me and I'd count the rise and fall of his chest to calm myself. This time, I had to count my own. In the silence, I found a sliver of clarity. I was here. I was listening. I was still someone, even if they'd forgotten. I let the silence protect me, not from them, but from forgetting myself. I don't think I'll ever forget how it felt. Not just what she said, but the silence that followed it. A silence that screamed. My son didn't say a word. That's what sits with me still. The ache that his silence carved. A deeper cut than any insult. He used to defend me. I still remember the day the neighbor boy called me old lady, and my son, just 9 years old, puffed up like a lion cub and said, "That's my mom, and she's beautiful." I remember his little fists, clenched with love. But now he stirred his coffee. My fingers curled under the quilt. Not in anger. I wasn't mad. I was mourning. Mourning that little boy and the way he used to look at me like I hung the stars over his bed. I buried something that day. Not just my expectations, but a version of him I had loved too freely. The birds had gone quiet outside. I hadn't noticed until just then. It was like even nature paused to hear whether he'd speak up. He didn't. A truck passed on the street, its rumble low and distant. The kitchen clatter resumed. She laughed at something, a sound I used to find lovely, but now felt sharp, and he laughed with her, just a small laugh, short and soft. But it landed hard. I don't hate him. I want you to know that. I don't think I ever could. But something changed that morning. Something quiet and permanent. And now when I look at him, I don't just see my son. I see a man who forgot for a moment who raised him. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't have to. The ache had already settled in like the pull of old bones, stretching after too long in stillness. But this pain, it wasn't just sadness. It was proof that I still felt, and if I still felt, then I wasn't gone. Not completely. I let that truth wrap itself around me, gentler than the quilt. I didn't try to push away the hurt this time. I let it sit beside me like an old friend who'd come for coffee, quiet, familiar, not welcome, but not ignored. Robin landed on the windowsill. I could hear its tiny claws tap the glass just once. It didn't stay long, just paused, as if checking in. Then it flew away. The golden light had filled the room now. No more early shadows, just warmth. I thought about all the years I'd spent filling this house, with meals, with stories, with lullabies and clean laundry and quiet sacrifices. That mattered. Even if no one said so out loud anymore, it mattered. I remembered who I was, not to them, but to me. And that morning, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel strong either, not yet. But I felt awake, and that was enough to begin. I remember the exact moment I picked those curtains. Pale yellow, just soft enough to catch the afternoon sun like honey dripped across the fabric. Henry had laughed, said they looked like something out of a country diner, and I told him that was the point. I wanted to be cozy. I wanted open arms on every window. He helped me hang them that day. The house still smelled like fresh paint and apples baking in the oven. We kept the windows open and let the breeze dance through the rooms. Every gust made the curtains flutter, and I stood there with my hands on my hips and said, "This is it. This is the house." And it was. Not just four walls. It was a cradle. A hope. A place where I could finally plant something and trust it would grow. "This is where we raise him," I said. Henry kissed my cheek and said, "Let's start tomorrow." "No," I told him, laughing. "Let's start now." We had barely unpacked the dishes, but I remember setting the table for dinner like it was Thanksgiving. Just the two of us, eating roasted chicken and apples with our fingers on the floor, laughing, dreaming. That afternoon, I didn't just decorate a living room. I stitched a life together, piece by piece, with sunlight and sweetness and the soft flutter of yellow cotton on the breeze. The hallway still creaks in the same places, even now. I could walk it blindfolded, and if I did, I'd still know where his little red scribbles used to be, right near the baseboards, where he first learned to hold a crayon. He was 3, maybe 4. I had just turned the stew down to simmer when I caught him crouched near the pantry, his tongue peeking out the corner of his mouth, concentrating like a man on a mission. I said, "What are you drawing there, sweetheart?" He grinned. "That's you, and Daddy, and me, and that's the moon." It didn't look like much, just stick arms, lopsided heads, one big green circle floating above it all, but I never scrubbed it off, not once. "Should we put it on paper next time?" I asked, crouching beside him. He looked up, eyes wide. "But the walls are bigger. Can't argue with that kind of logic." Henry thought I was being too soft. "It'll ruin the paint," he'd mutter, though I'd catch him tracing the lines with his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. We never repainted that part of the wall. Years later, when the company came over, I'd throw a table or a chair in front of it. But it stayed, because it was his, because it meant this house was lived in, truly, joyfully lived in, and I wanted that on the walls, where it couldn't be forgotten. The kitchen was mine long before anything else in the house felt settled. It was the first room I made feel like home, the first drawer I organized, the first place I left fingerprints that mattered. That kitchen heard my humming more than it heard the radio. I had flour on my elbows and cinnamon under my fingernails, more often than not. Henry used to joke, "You could feed the whole street with what you call a quiet Sunday." And maybe I could have. The oven door had a squeak I never fixed. It was like a bell announcing, something good is coming. I'd open it, steam rushing out, and my son, barefoot and wild-haired, would come running. "What is it today, Mama?" "Close your eyes," I'd say. "Guess." He always guessed wrong, but that was part of the game. Biscuits, stews, pot roasts, peach cobblers. That kitchen knew love in the form of bubbling pots and flowery aprons and the way a wooden spoon tapped the counter like punctuation. And the table? Oh, that table. That table heard bedtime stories told over lunch. It held scraped knees and broken hearts. It was where we learned spelling words and where we held hands before meals, where my husband reached for me quietly when he didn't know what else to say. It held everything. It wasn't just for eating. It was for a gathering, for pausing, for remembering that life, even in its mess, was full. That kitchen didn't sparkle. It wasn't spotless, but it glowed. And that glow lived in every meal, every moment, every sound that once filled it. His fingers were so small back then. I remember that more than anything, how they curled around just one of mine, not the whole hand, just one finger. And it was enough to make me feel like I was holding the whole world. We were headed to the garden. He wanted to help pick the last of the tomatoes before the frost came in. "Can I wear Daddy's boots?" he asked. "They'll eat your legs whole," I told him, laughing. He wore them anyway. They clunked on the back porch as we walked, sounding like a marching band made of one. The leaves rustled beneath our feet, crisp and full of that end-of-season smell. The soil was still damp from the night rain. He asked 100 questions. Do tomatoes sleep? What's a root? Is that a worm or a snake? And I answered every one like it mattered more than anything else. Back then, he looked at me like I had all the answers, like I'd invented the sky. And in those moments, I didn't just feel like his mother. I felt like the center of the whole spinning world. He reached up once, dirt on his cheek, and said, "Don't let go, okay?" "I won't," I said, and I didn't. Not for a long, long time. You ever hear laughter so big it fills the whole house? That's what it was like then. Giggles bouncing down the hallway like ping-pong balls. Henry's low chuckle rumbling from the den, and our boy squealing with joy over nothing. At all. Evenings back then didn't need plans. They just happened. One moment I'd be stirring a pot, and the next we'd be dancing barefoot to some old jazz record, using spatulas as microphones. He used to play the piano, not well, bless his heart, but with so much feeling. He'd press each key like it, held a story. Sometimes I'd hum along. Sometimes we'd all sing, off-key and full-hearted. The grandfather clock would tick in the corner, never rushed. It was the kind of house where time softened, where a minute stretched long enough to hold a memory. We'd end the night with blankets tossed across laps, books half read, tea going cold, and still laughter. Maybe not loud by then, but warm, lingering. That house wasn't perfect. The wallpaper, peeled in corners, the faucets dripped sometimes, but we had presents. We had each other. We had the kind of joy you can't buy new. Even now, I swear, if I close my eyes in the hallway, I can still hear it. The echoes haven't left. They just sleep quietly in the walls, waiting for someone to listen. I used to picture us growing. Old here, rocking chairs on the porch, grandbabies chasing fireflies in the yard, Sunday dinners with too many casseroles and not enough chairs. We'd host birthdays and baptisms, holidays with mismatched tablecloths and too much pie. The house would grow fuller, louder, more beautiful with every year. That was the dream. I'd stand by the fireplace sometimes and imagine the mantel lined with graduation photos, wedding invitations pinned to the fridge. I believed in that future, like it was already printed on the calendar. But it didn't happen like that. Now it's just me, and the fireplace still crackles, but it doesn't speak back. The framed photo on the mantel catches the last of the day's light. We're all smiling in it, frozen in time, a family that once was. I never imagined this part. The quiet after the laughter, the echoes without the voices. A home that still stands, but somehow feels less whole. I thought it would always be ours, but I've learned, even things built with love can change shape. Even roots can be forgotten. And sometimes, the hardest thing is learning how to stay in a place that no longer remembers how to hold you. She stepped into the house like she had already lived here in her mind. One hand on her suitcase, the other gripping a candle that smelled like sugared vanilla with something floral behind it. She smiled when she saw me. Wide, practiced. The kind of smile you give to cashiers and neighbors. Not the kind that reaches, the heart. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, wiped my hands on my apron, and said, "Welcome home, sweetheart." She nodded, still smiling. "Thank you. It's beautiful here." Her voice was polite. Her tone is sweet. But something in her eyes stayed quiet, not guarded, just blank, like she had packed her manners but left her warmth behind. The door stood open behind her, letting in that late summer light. Warm air drifted through, carrying lemon polish from the furniture I had wiped down just that morning. It mixed with her candle, so sugary, so strong, it gave me the tiniest headache right behind my right eye. Henry would have laughed it off. "Don't go sniffing too deep," he'd say. "Just breathe through it, Rosie." But Henry wasn't here. She stepped further in. "Where do you want these?" "Oh, let me take those," I said, reaching for her boxes. She hesitated a second before handing them over. Not rude, not distant, just unsure. And me? I smiled. I kept smiling, but deep in my chest, something pulled back, just a little, like a string being tugged, quiet and slow. That was the first ache. The first flicker of knowing this wasn't going to be easy. The boxes came in like a slow wave. First a few by the doorway, then a tower near the hallway wall, then more in. The linen closet where I used to keep spare quilts for guests. I didn't say anything, just watched. She had a system, labels written in neat, slanted letters. Books, bathroom stuff, linens. One by one, the spaces I once filled with memories became filled with things. Not bad things, just not mine. I offered to help unpack. "Oh no, I've got it," she said, cheerful, quick. So I stood by and smoothed my apron and watched her tape cutter slice through boxes like she belonged there. And maybe she did. Legally, officially, maybe she did. But the house, my house, didn't know her yet, and neither did I. I wiped the dust from the hall table and smiled when she passed. "That one's wobbly on the left leg," I offered gently. She said, "Oh," without looking. The sun was still warm outside. A breeze drifted in through the screen door, but it didn't cool the tightness in my chest. The scent of cardboard filled the entryway. I could hear her footsteps upstairs, brisk and confident, drawers sliding open and closed. I found myself making myself smaller, moving quieter, standing out of the way. I smiled again. Habit by now. But inside, I felt something else. Not anger. Just shrinking. Like I was folding myself up to make space I hadn't realized I was still holding. I have been cooking since noon. Roast beef, slow and tender, carrots with brown sugar. Biscuits made from scratch, brushed with butter just before they went in the oven. Henry always said you could taste the effort, and I put my whole heart in that meal. The house smelled like Sunday dinner, even though it was only Tuesday. I thought, maybe this would be our start, a soft beginning. She came into the kitchen while I was setting the table, my good dishes too, the ones with the blue cornflowers. "Oh," she said, "I already ate." I blinked. "You did?" She opened the freezer. "Just one of those lean meals. I like the pesto one." She slid it into the microwave without another word. The beeping echoed louder than it should have. I didn't argue, didn't say how long I'd been in that kitchen. I just nodded like I'd expected it all along. My roast sat steaming in the center of the table, untouched. My son came in, kissed her cheek, and smiled at the microwave. "Smells good in here," he said. Don't even think he looked at the roast. We sat. He ate what she made. I picked at my plate. She chatted about a podcast. He laughed at something she said. Later, when they left the room, I scraped the plates alone. The biscuits were still warm, still soft. I wrapped them in a towel and set them aside, knowing no one would eat them. The kitchen light hummed above. Me. The rosemary I'd chopped earlier still lingered in the air, fragrant and wasted. As I stood there, rinsing the untouched plates, I realized I wasn't fading because I was old. I was fading because they had stopped looking. She opened the drawer like she'd done it 100 times before, pulled out a candle, and lit it with a flick of a fancy silver lighter. I watched from the armchair. I didn't say a word. Sugared plum. That's what it said on the label. It filled the room in seconds, sticky, sweet, like candy melted in perfume. She smiled, sat back on the couch, and scrolled through her phone. Didn't mind candles. I had my own tucked away, lavender, clove, cinnamon in the fall. But this one, it took up all the air. It pushed out the scent of the old wood floors, of the bread I'd baked that morning, of lemon polish and the faint trace of rose soap I'd always used on the pillows. I couldn't smell the house anymore. It was like the walls were holding their breath. She didn't notice. She was laughing at something on her screen. I wanted to ask her to blow it out, but I didn't. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the difficult one, the overly sensitive one. So I stayed quiet. The windows were still open. The breeze came through soft as ever. But the candle smoke hung low, curling like fingers over the mantel, settling into corners where memories used to live. I swallowed hard. Stood to go fold towels or find something else that still felt like mine. And as I walked away, I thought, this house used to smell like comfort. Now it smells like someone passing through. I brought out my best teacups, porcelain blue with tiny roses. I had kept them wrapped in paper for years, saved for someone who might appreciate their delicate handles and soft clink on a saucer. I thought maybe today was the day. I thought you might like some tea, I said, handing her a cup. She smiled and said, "Oh, thanks," without even looking at it. Set it down on the table beside her unread. Later, I folded fresh towels and placed them on her bed, white, still warm from the dryer. I tucked a little sprig of lavender between them, the way I used to do when guests stayed over. A quiet welcome. That evening, I passed her room and saw the towels still folded. The lavender, drooping, untouched. I asked if she liked her room. "Yeah," she said, from behind her phone. "It's fine." I stood there for a second longer. "I can bring you a small lamp if the light's too harsh." She nodded. "Sure." It wasn't that she was rude, just disconnected, like her thank yous were scripted. Like every small kindness I offered came with a polite wall. I smiled anyway. But that night, as I sat in my own room folding the corner of my quilt just right, I felt something hollow settle in. Like I had invited someone into a memory, and they didn't even see the photo on the wall. It happened gradually. No one told me to step back. I just started doing it without thinking. My footsteps grew quieter. I tiptoed more. I used to hum while I cooked, tunes from the radio, silly little church melodies. One day I caught myself humming and stopped halfway through a note. Didn't know why. Just felt wrong. I started asking before I turned on the TV. "Is anyone using this room?" I'd ask, even when it was empty. One evening, I came into the kitchen to make tea and saw her already there. Headphones in, a podcast playing, something bubbling on the stove. I backed out slowly. Didn't mean to interrupt. She didn't. Hear me. I found myself spending more time in the den, folding napkins, sorting drawers that didn't need sorting, just trying not to be in the way. The house didn't echo the same. The rhythms were different, louder in places, quieter in others. But not for me, not anymore. My son would check in, brief but kind. "Everything okay, Ma?" And I'd smile. "Just fine, dear." But inside, I missed my kitchen. I missed my volume. I missed being part of the pulse. Now I was quiet. And she was the rhythm. And as I sat that night with the TV humming to no one in particular, I realized I hadn't left, but the house had moved on without me. I stood in the doorway, holding the napkin I'd ironed that morning. The table was already full. Chairs tucked in, plates arranged, voices tangled in chatter I wasn't part of. My chair, wasn't there. Not shifted aside, not waiting. Gone. She noticed first. "Oh," she said. "We ran out of space. It's just a bit crowded tonight." I nodded. "Of course," I said. "Of course." My son glanced up briefly. "You okay, Ma?" "Just fine," I answered, folding the napkin in my hand tighter than it needed to be. I didn't mention the ache rising beneath my ribs, the kind of ache that doesn't demand attention but quietly settles in like an old friend. They returned to conversation, forks clinking against plates, someone laughing too loudly at something someone else said. I stayed there a moment longer than I should have, just long enough to realize they weren't going to make room. Not this time. I turned away before they could see my hands shake, before I had to lie again and say it didn't sting. The tray wobbled slightly in my hands as I carried it into the den. Meatloaf, carrots, a biscuit. Dinner by portion, not invitation. I placed it gently on my knees and eased into the old armchair, the one that still smelled like Henry's aftershave if I pressed my cheek against the armrest just right. The TV was on, a sitcom, something bright and noisy. Laughter from the screen echoed faintly, but it only made the room feel emptier. The kind of laughter that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that tries too hard to cover silence. I picked at the food. It tasted like nothing. Not bad, just blank. I helped make it, chopped the onions, stirred the gravy, and timed the biscuits. But here, alone with my tray, it felt like I was eating someone else's effort, like I was feeding a stranger. From the other room came another wave of laughter. Real. This time. Glasses clinking, voices overlapping, comfort I used to belong to. I tried to focus on my fork, on the soft hum of the fridge, on the warmth of the blanket over my lap. But nothing tastes right. And the tray, no matter how carefully I balanced it, felt like it didn't belong there. Just like me. I didn't mean to watch them. I just happened to glance that way. Through the arch between the rooms, I could see the dining table, the way their heads leaned in toward one another, the flicker of candlelight across the glasses, the kind of intimacy that builds through shared meals and soft laughter. They were toasting something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the wine glasses rise. It looked like a painting I used to be in, the kind where I was seated at the head of the table, Henry beside me, our son across from us with his elbows on the table and a grin on his face as wide as summer. But now, I was just a shadow, tucked back in the den with the hum of the TV and a plate gone cold on my lap. I shifted slightly, hoping the armchair wouldn't creak. I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want them to. No, I was watching. Maybe that's the worst part, when you stop wanting to be seen and start just trying not to intrude. She was laughing at something, her hand on my son's arm. He leaned into it like it was the most natural thing in the world. I used to be the one he leaned toward. I started a moment longer, not with jealousy, just a quiet wondering. Wondering if they even noticed that my voice was missing. That the spot I used to fill was now just space, neutral, silent. There was a time when I filled this house with the sound of my life. Now, I was wallpaper, faded, still, meant to blend in. The hallway felt longer in the dark. I walked slowly, letting my hand trail the edge of the wall, and then I saw her. Me, captured in a photo on the wall, mid-laugh, holding a pie dish, standing beside Henry with flour on my apron and pride in my smile. The frame was a little crooked. I straightened it, fingertips trembling. She looked so alive, so full. I leaned in closer, tracing the edge of my own frozen smile. I remembered that day. Thanksgiving. Henry had kissed my cheek when no one was looking. Said the pie was the best I'd ever made, even though the crust was too dark on one side. We passed the camera around, insisted on group pictures, teased each other about double chins and messy hair. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Now, the wall still carried my face, but the rooms didn't carry my place. I whispered, almost without meaning to. Do you still see me? The photo didn't answer, just shimmered slightly in the low light, catching the golden glow of the hallway lamp. And in that silence, I felt more ghost than woman. I didn't cry. I wanted to. My chest felt full with the ache of it, like someone had taken all my unsaid words and pushed them behind my ribs. But no tears came. I sat in the den, the old shawl wrapped around my shoulders. The one Henry bought me the Christmas after my surgery, blue with little white flecks that looked like stars. I remember him saying, "Now you can wear the sky when you're resting." It still smelled a little like him. Not much, but enough. The Vaya TV was off now. The house is quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. I pulled the shawl tighter, watched the glass of the window shift with every gust of wind. A tiny draft slipped through the frame and brushed my cheek, cold but not unpleasant. Just real. Sometimes the quiet speaks louder than people do, and tonight it whispered to me, soft, steady, you are still here. Even if no one sees you, even if no one thanks you, you are still here. So I closed my eyes. I didn't cry, but I felt every inch of what they hadn't said. I used to carve the turkey. That was my job. Standing at the head of the table, apron still on, holding that big fork like a scepter. I'd ask who wanted white meat, who wanted dark, and I'd serve them with pride, with love. I led the prayer, too. Let's hold hands, I'd say, and we did. Even the kids, even the reluctant ones. I'd thank the Lord for food and family and whatever lesson we were learning that year. There were always lessons. I made the pie crusts from scratch, cutting in the butter with my old metal pastry blender. Rolled the dough on the same counter where I'd measured my son's height in pencil marks. And the table? That table had heard it all. My stories, my laughter, my scolding when homework was late. My encouragement when someone had a hard day. I thought I'd always be the center. But now, the table sits full without me. The meals go on, the stories continue. The glasses still clink, the forks still scrape, and laughter still rises. Just not mine. And the strangest part is, it didn't take anything dramatic. No big moment of exile, just a slow easing out. Like when you remove one book from a shelf and it shifts, slightly, but holds. They adjusted without me. I sat in the den, remembering the warmth of those old dinners, the glow, the rhythm. Now the glow belongs to someone else, and the rhythm no longer waits for my cue. And that realization? It sat heavier than the missing chair. I heard her before I saw her. Those soft little pats across the hallway floor, bare feet on hardwood, like a lullaby, being tapped out just for me. The house had been still, wrapped in that kind of hush only the deepest part of night knows. But those footsteps carried something different, something light. She peeked around the corner, her hair tousled and her pajama top slightly askew. Her eyes were wide and quiet, blinking in the low hallway light. I didn't say anything. I just watched her watching me. Then, without a word, she came forward, climbed up beside me like she'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't ask if she could. She didn't need to. She just belonged. I made room, lifted the edge of the quilt for her, and she curled into the crook of my arm like her bones remembered me. Her skin smelled faintly of lavender lotion and warm blankets. I rested my hand lightly on her back, felt the small rise and fall of her breath, slow, trusting. She yawned and laid her head on my shoulder. I didn't speak. I didn't want to. Break the spell. In that moment, the quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was full. We sat like that for a long while, the lamplight low and golden beside us. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Faint scent of a vanilla candle still hung in the air, mingling with the soap she'd used in her bath. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "Do you miss your old house?" It landed like a pebble in a still pond, gentle, but with ripples that reached the deepest parts of me. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I was caught between the weight of the question and the beauty that it had been asked at all. "No one's ever asked me that," I said softly, my voice barely above my breath. She nodded against my arm. "I liked the pink door on your porch." I smiled then, the kind that doesn't show teeth but fills the chest. I had painted that door myself, back when I believed bright colors could fix everything. I looked down at her, her lashes flickering like candlelight. She didn't know what she'd given me. In that quiet, she made me feel seen again. She tugged the quilt higher, covering both of us with care. It was my old patchwork one, The one Henry used to say was stitched from memories more than fabric. She didn't ask if she could share it. She just pulled it over herself and then over me, as if to say, "We're in this together now." Her thumb found her mouth, her other hand found mine. Small fingers, warm, certain. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and she whispered, "Sometimes I like you better than Mama." I didn't laugh, I didn't correct her, I just let the moment wrap around us like the quilt itself, fragile, holy, not meant to be interrupted. The television played softly in the background, some old rerun with a laugh track too loud for the moment, but I didn't mute it. The soft blue light flickered across the room, painting shadows that didn't feel lonely tonight. She shifted a little closer and rested her leg across mine. Her whole body relaxed, like she'd been holding something all day and only now could let it go. I ran my fingers through her hair, slow and gentle, the way I used to when my son was her age. She sighed, the kind of sound children make when they know they're safe. I closed my eyes for a moment and just let it be what it was. A shared breath, a silent trust, a secret only we two knew. Not everything needs to be said. Some love arrives in quiet curls of a child's body beside yours. Some secrets are better kept in the hush between heartbeats. Her breathing was steady now, slow and even, her tiny body curled against mine. I let my hand rest on her back and stared at the ceiling, not really seeing it. My mind drifted back to a sterile room lit too brightly, the beep of monitors and the hush of nurses' shoes. I remember when she was born. My son stood beside her, bassinet, his hands trembling as he reached in. "What if I drop her?" he asked. "You won't," I whispered. He touched her cheek with his pinky first, like he was checking if she was real. And then he picked her up, awkwardly, tenderly. "She's so small," he said, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "She's yours," I said. "You'll figure it out." He rocked her gently, his whole body tense as if one wrong move might break her. But he didn't break her. Funny how we're all so careful with babies, and yet, later in life, we forget how easily we break one another without ever lifting a hand. I looked down at her now, his daughter, her chest rising and falling like a lullaby. And I wondered, does he remember holding her that way? Does he know I remember every second of it? Because I do. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making them whisper against the windows. Inside, it was just the two of us, wrapped in warmth, in silence, in something that didn't need defining. She didn't come to me with questions about what I could do, or how much I had left, or what use I was in a house where I wasn't the center anymore. She just came. Her love didn't ask permission. It didn't need credentials or explanation. It simply showed up in bare feet and bedtime breath and the grip of a small hand. And in that stillness, something stirred inside me. A piece of myself I thought had long gone quiet began to lift its head again. Maybe I wasn't strong the way I used to be, not with pies or long walks or stitched quilts, but I was still alive, still able to be someone's lap, someone's warmth, someone's first choice when sleep feels safest beside you, and that kind of being alive doesn't come with noise. It comes in the hush, in the little visit that turns silence into sanctuary. The room had gone still, bathed in the glow of the lamp, which had dimmed with the evening. Its soft hum filled the space between the creaks in the walls and the signs of a settling house. I could still hear her mother's words if I reached for them. Dead weight, like I was something to carry, to endure. But tonight, those words felt far away, like a sound underwater, muffled and weightless. What I heard now was breathing. Soft, slow, certain. Her breath sinking with mine. Her small hand rested on my wrist, her forehead against my arm. And I thought, I am still someone's warmth. I am still someone's safest place to land. She didn't see years on my face or slowness in my steps. She saw me, and when a child sees you, really sees you, not for what you do, but for how you make them feel, that's a kind of proof that no insult can erase. She moved slightly in her sleep, murmuring something I didn't catch. I brushed a hair off her cheek. No one else needed to know this moment existed, but I did, and in that knowing, the scales tipped. Her words mattered more than her mother's ever could, because I wasn't dead weight, not to her, and not to me. The laundry never stopped. I don't know how 3 people could produce so many socks, towels, and crumpled shirts, but it just kept coming, overflowing the basket like some stubborn tide. Most days, I didn't mind. I stood at the folding table in the little laundry nook, pale spring light stretching across the floor, touching the edges of a wrinkled pillowcase and warming my hands as I smoothed it flat. I folded quietly, carefully. Like it mattered, 1 sock, no match. I'd set it to the side, always hoping its partner would reappear, though I knew it wouldn't. A dish towel with a faint spaghetti stain. A hoodie she wore nearly every day, though never said, "Thank you." When it returned fresh and warm, I folded them anyway, not for recognition, not even for gratitude, but for something else, something quieter. The need to still have a role, to still be needed in the creases of a towel, in the corners of a sheet. My fingers moved by memory, by muscle, by love I didn't know how to. Stop giving. No one saw me in that little corner, standing among the hum of the dryer and the smell of detergent. But I felt grounded there. In folding what they left behind, I still found pieces of myself. The tile floor in the kitchen was warm from the midday sun, and I could feel it through the soles of my old house shoes. I bent down to pick up a toy someone had left under the table, a plastic dinosaur with 1 chipped leg, and that familiar ache shot through my knees like a warning bell. I paused, hand on my thigh, waited for it to pass. It didn't. Not right away, but I stood anyway. No one saw me wince. No one heard the soft breath I let out, like letting go of pain too proud to name. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the oven glass, my shoulders hunched, my pace slower than I remembered. But I kept going. I always did. I'd made a promise. To Henry once, after his 2nd hospital stay. "I'll keep going," I told him, "even if it's just me." And so I did. The dishwasher hummed in the background, a soft rhythm I could work beside. Outside, a car drove past, distant and steady. I picked up crumbs from the counter, wiped down the table, opened the fridge to check the milk without being asked. I stayed standing. Not because I was strong, exactly, but because I still needed to be part of this place. They didn't notice when I stopped sitting at the table. It had started with me standing to refill a pitcher, then fetching napkins, then clearing plates. One evening, I just didn't sit at all. No one said a word. I hovered near the edge, the way steam hovers over a cooling pot, there, but barely seen. They passed dishes, shared jokes, talked about school pickups and sales at the grocery store. I moved around them like a breeze, silent, soft, invisible. Sometimes she'd say, "Thanks," without looking. Sometimes my son would offer a smile across the room, but it never reached all the way to where I stood. They didn't ask if I was hungry. I don't blame them. I didn't eat much those days. A few spoonfuls here, a biscuit there. I'd chew slowly at the sink, watching the light stretch across the floor, listening to the scrape of their forks. I wasn't bitter, just quiet. I started to wonder if maybe I had always been this way and hadn't realized it. Like wallpaper, that was once bright, but slowly faded until it matched the walls it used to decorate. I still did my part. I wiped crumbs no one saw. I folded throws and straightened cushions and picked up toys after she had already stepped over them. The roast, chicken from dinner still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of lemon cleaner I'd used that morning. The light in the room flickered as it filtered through the trees. They didn't see the tiredness in my eyes, or the way my back aches after hours of doing nothing they'd call work. I think I started to believe them. That I was just there. Background. But even wallpaper was chosen once. Even silence used to be a song. I had stitched it myself, the quilt, every square, every corner. It had taken weeks, maybe months. Long nights when sleep felt impossible, back when Henry had passed, and I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I made something beautiful. I chose the fabric carefully, pieces from old blouses, curtains we'd once hung in the hallway, one corner of Henry's favorite flannel shirt. Every piece held something, a memory, a moment. I wrapped it in brown paper, tied with ribbon, and placed it gently in their guest room closet. I never said much about it. I just hoped they'd discover it, use it, let it become part of their warmth, but they never did. It stayed folded on the shelf, tucked behind a stack of store-bought comforters. It sat there, untouched, like the part of me that made it, waiting to be unwrapped. I went in one day to put away towels, and there it was, still in its wrapping, corners sharp. It hadn't even been opened. I reached for it, held it in my hands. Soft, heavy, still warm somehow with everything I'd poured into it, and I thought, some gifts you make just to give. Others, you hope it will be received. No one asked about my day. That used to bother me. Not anymore. I had my own company now. Rows of little herbs in mismatched pots lined up along the kitchen windowsill. Basil, rosemary, mint. I talked to them while I watered, voice low, careful not to wake the house. You're doing good, I told the basil. Look at you stretching for the sun. I liked how they reached up every day without needing a reason. They just grew, quietly, steadily. No applause. No spotlight. They simply existed with purpose. The afternoon light made their leaves glow just a little at the edges. The breeze from the cracked window carried in the scent of spring and damp soil, mixing with the warmth of the kitchen. I clipped a sprig of rosemary and held it to my nose. It reminded me of Sunday roasts in Henry's sweater. I smiled to myself. No one needed to see it. It was just mine. Sometimes I'd hum to them, just a line or two from an old hymn. Not for their sake, for mine. Because even when no one's listening, your voice still counts. Even when no one asks, your story still matters. It happened gradually. One night, I went to pin something to the fridge, a coupon for apples, I think, and I saw it, a new photo. The four of them are smiling on a carousel. Her arms around the baby, my son's hand raised in mid-wave. I wasn't in it. Next to it, a birthday party, streamers and cake, her parents front and center, then another, school play, vacation, holiday brunch. My hands paused on the fridge door. It wasn't cruel, just quiet. Like the way sunlight leaves a room, inch by inch, and you don't realize until it's dusk. I stood there, the hum of the fridge the only sound. The kitchen light glowed overhead, soft and golden. I touched one of the photos gently, like it might change if I loved it enough. But it didn't. I went back to folding towels. Still warm from the dryer, still soft. I lined up the edges like I always did, careful and precise. It was something I could still do well. No one saw me, but the towels felt my care. No one thanked me, but the dinner stayed hot because I stirred it on time. I was still here, folding, warming, holding space, even if I was no longer in the fridge. She didn't text. She didn't call ahead. She just knocked. A soft, certain knock, 3 gentle taps on the screen door, like a rhythm that had lived in my memory longer than any ringtone. I knew it was her before I even stood up. I opened the door, and there stood Mrs. Whitaker, Same neat cardigan, same cloud of floral perfume, same no-nonsense eyes softened by time. Her smile didn't ask for permission. It just arrived. "Well," she said, holding up a foil-covered dish, "I had some extra banana bread." The spring breeze pushed past her into the front hallway. I caught the scent of lilacs blooming in the yard, mingled with grass clippings, and something older, something like familiarity. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She didn't hesitate, didn't look behind her, just crossed the threshold like women used to do when friendships weren't scheduled but lived in knock-knock moments and warm ovens. She set the bread on the counter. "Kettle on?" "Already was," I said, though it hadn't been. And just like that, the house opened up a little, like it remembered how. She brought it in a foil pan, no label, no ribbon, just wrapped and warm. That banana bread smelled like something out of memory, soft, cinnamon-rich, full of good intentions. I plated it on the chipped porcelain I save for people who see me. She didn't mind the ware. She called it charming. We sat at the dining table, the golden light spilling over everything like someone had left heaven's door cracked open. Her tea sat in front of her, steam curling up toward the ceiling. "So," she said, "how have you been?" Not in the way people ask to be polite, but in the way people ask when they already know the answer might not be neat. I opened my mouth, closed it again. I don't know why that made my throat ache. Maybe because no one had asked in a while, or maybe because I wasn't sure how much truth I had left to speak. She broke off a piece of bread and waited. I said, "I've been folding laundry that no one thanks me for." She smiled, eyes kind. "Sounds about right." We talked about nothing and everything. The weather, church, her grandson's awful haircut. We sipped until the tea cooled and talked past the moment most guests would have stood to leave. I told her I missed being useful. She said, "You're still seen, Rosie. Don't let them make you small." And that was when I felt it. The air, shifting. My shoulders are sinking. The slow exhale of being known. She didn't sit on the couch at first. She stood by the quilt, folded neatly, tucked over the edge of the armrest like it always was. The sun hit it just right through the lace curtains, making the deep blue squares glow like ocean water. She reached out and touched the edge. Just a brush of fingers. "He loved this one," she said. "Henry, right?" I nodded, swallowing the lump that rose too quickly. Used to bring it to every potluck. "Said he couldn't nap right without it," she added, smiling. I hadn't expected her to remember. No one ever did, not even my son. But she did. She didn't look at it like decor. She looked at it like a keepsake, like something that still held warmth, still held him. "I always wondered where you got the red paisley square," she said. "Old apron," I whispered. "His favorite." She gave a soft chuckle. Of course it was. And just like that, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't. Background noise or an old woman with folded hands, I was Rosie, wife of Henry, maker of quilts. Still known. We laughed about nothing at first. The little things, like that one Easter hymn we never quite got right, no matter how many times we tried. The one with all the extra verses and the awkward falsetto. She sang the first line, and I joined in without meaning to, both of us off-key and delighted. Then we moved on to the minister's ties, how they always seemed to be choking him rather than dressing him. How he never knew his microphone was on during the post-sermon snack run. "Oh, Rosie," she said between giggles, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "Remember the potluck when your Jell-O mold slid right off the table? And straight into the baptistry," I added. Henry said it was the most blessed gelatin he'd ever seen. The light danced across the floor, catching the rim of the sugar bowl, casting tiny stars across the tablecloth. We laughed until our sides ached, and then fell into a warm quiet, the kind that only happens when two people have shared enough history to sit in silence without discomfort. The warmth in the room wasn't from the sun anymore. It came from being remembered, from being met, not as a burden, but as someone still here, still me. I hadn't planned to say anything personal. I never do. But somehow, one story turned into another, and before I realized it, the words started slipping through the cracks I'd tried to seal up. I told her about the dinner tray, how they forgot to set a place for me last Sunday, how I ate, alone in the den with the sitcom on too loud. I told her about the silence, the kind that presses on your chest like damp cotton, the kind that hums behind every smile you fake. I told her about the candles, how their scent pushes out the smell of my bread, my polish, my memories, how it makes my home feel like someone else's idea of cozy. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She just reached across the table and laid her hand on mine. Not heavy, not dramatic, just present. Her skin was warm. Her palm calloused in places from years of holding other people's pain, maybe. I looked down at our hands and realized I hadn't been touched gently in weeks. I whispered, "Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing here." She gave the faintest squeeze. "You're doing more than they know." And that was all. No fixing, no flurry of suggestions, just a witness to my hurt. And suddenly, that was enough. She left the same way she came, without fuss. A soft thank you at the door, a hug that lingered just long enough to matter, and the sound of her shoes tapping down the porch steps. But the house didn't feel empty when she left. Her teacup sat on the tray, still resting where her hand had left it. The air carried a whisper of banana bread and chamomile. And the laughter, that delicate kind that comes from being real with someone, stayed tucked into the corners like the scent of old roses. I didn't clear the dishes right. Away. I let them sit. I walked to the living room, sat in the same spot where she'd noticed the quilt, and let the silence wrap around me. Not cold, but full. Like something sacred had happened, and I didn't want to disturb it. The curtain lifted, a little in the breeze, then fell gently back into place. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered. I felt like a page someone had taken time to read again. I was wiping the same dish for the third time, not because it needed more scrubbing, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The afternoon. Sun came in through the blinds in uneven stripes, warming part of the counter and leaving the rest in shadow. Her voice floated in from around the corner. She was on the phone again, louder than usual. I mean, it's like having another mouth to feed that never says thank you. I stopped wiping. Her tone was sharp. Casual in that way people get when they think the person they're talking about can't hear, or won't respond. She just floats around, she went on, like furniture. Quiet, but always there. My fingers tightened around the dish towel. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. It wasn't the first time she'd said something that stung. But this was different. This wasn't impatience or a sigh over a missed laundry load. This was something else. Something that took the shape of dismissal and settled cold in my chest. I didn't move. Not yet. My heart was suddenly wide awake, not angry, not broken, just aware of the air, the silence, the weight of being spoken about like a shadow in your own home. I didn't plan to move, but my feet carried me forward past the edge of the hallway into the warmth of the kitchen. She was still talking, back to me, phone in her ear, leaning against the counter. But something shifted when I stepped in. Not loud, just presence. The kind of presence that says, "I heard you, I didn't speak. I just cleared my throat. Quiet, intentional." She froze. The towel was still in my hand. The ceramic mug I'd set down, minutes earlier, rested on the counter between us. A fly buzzed lazily near the window pane, the only sound besides the blood rushing in my ears. She turned slowly, like a child caught mid-lie. I didn't look away. My breath was steady. My posture is soft but sure. That moment didn't need fireworks. It needed a pause. And I had become one. When she turned and saw me, the color dropped from her face like the light had been turned down. The smile she wore, painted. Lips and all, flickered, then fell. Her mouth opened slightly, as if searching for something to land on. A word, a reason, maybe an apology. But nothing came. I could see it in her eyes, the shock, the guilt, maybe even fear. But more than anything, I saw recognition. The realization that I had not only heard her, but that I had come to stand in the room with the weight of it. I didn't step closer. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood in the square of sunlight, on the tile floor, letting it split across my shoulders like truth. The fridge hummed behind her. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. But inside that kitchen, there was only breath and awareness. The kind of awareness that makes time stretch, thin. She didn't hide it, and I didn't flinch. And somehow in that moment, we both saw each other more honestly than we had in months. I didn't plan my words. They rose slowly like something pulled up from deep water, heavy, clear, and finally ready to breathe air again. "I hope no one talks about you like this when you're old," I said, voice even. She didn't blink. Just stood there, her back pressed lightly to the fridge, arms stiff at her sides. There was no anger in my voice, no accusation, just truth, spoken plainly, like setting a plate down on the table without needing to explain what it's for. "I raised a boy with kindness," I added, quieter now. "And I'm trying to live with that same kindness, even when it's not returned." She looked down. The curtain fluttered near the window, a breeze shifting the room's temperature ever so slightly. The afternoon light had gone softer now, less sharp, more golden, like a hush before evening began. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't argue, and that was fine. Some truths don't ask for reaction. They just need to be heard. She didn't say a word, just slipped past me and out of the kitchen, her footsteps light, fast, fading down the hallway like she didn't want to wake anything. I stood there for a moment, hands resting on the edge of the counter. Alone again, but not the same kind of alone I'd felt before. This one had edges, definition. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. A bird chirped faintly outside the window, just once. The kind of chirp that feels like punctuation at the end of a thought. The house was still, but something had moved, not furniture, not people, something deeper. I leaned back against the counter and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My shoulders softened, and then squared just slightly. No triumph, no fanfare, just me, still standing, still here. I thought I might be angry. I thought maybe that's what would come next. The burning, the blame, the endless rehearsal of what I should have said or how she should have answered. But none of that came. Instead, I felt something else. Clarity. Like someone had drawn the curtains back in a room that had been dim for too long. The window was open now, and warm air moved through. The kitchen. Honeysuckle from the back fence drifted in, sweet and old and strong enough to stand on its own. The clock ticked on the wall, steady, loud. I hadn't noticed it in weeks, but now I heard it clearly, like time had decided to keep count again. Just for me. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked around, not at the dishes or the chairs or the fridge, but at the space, my space. I wasn't furious. I wasn't fragile. I was awake. And that was enough. Enough to move forward. Enough to begin again. Quietly, on my own terms. Because I didn't need to be reminded of who I was. I had remembered all by myself. I heard his footsteps first. Not the heavy ones from his teenage years, not the rushed ones from work, and not the tired ones that passed me by in recent months. These were quiet, deliberate, like he was thinking hard with every step. I looked up from my crossword puzzle, not that I'd filled in a single word, and there he was, standing in the doorway with something in his hands, something I recognized. Before I fully saw it, the blue ribbon, Henry's ribbon, the one he used to tie around everything, seed packets, toolkits, even sandwiches if he didn't trust the bag. And inside that ribbon, I knew, were the letters. My heart paused, not with fear, but with something that felt like reverence, like a church breath, like a held note at the end of a hymn. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his fingers curled around the bundle of old paper and decades, and in that soft light spilling from the hallway, dusted gold, like time itself floating through the air. I saw something in his face that hadn't been there in a long while. He looked like he'd found a part of his father, and maybe a part of me too. He sat down slowly on the arm of the couch, the letters in his lap like something sacred. His thumb brushed across the top one. It crackled softly, paper dry and fragile, worn with time and holding. He cleared his throat. Then, softly, carefully, he read, "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But God, I loved her." His voice cracked on the word, God. He stopped for a moment, swallowed. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just watched his shoulders shift, the way they used to when he cried as a boy, but didn't want me to know. That quiet tremble, that inward fold. He looked down again, rereading, the line silently. I could see it echoing through him. Henry had written those words in the second month after his diagnosis. I remember the pen he used, the tea he let go cold, the way he tucked the letter beneath his shaving kit as if I'd never find it. But I had, and I'd kept it. He turned the letter over and read more, softly, not for me, not even for himself, but for the space between us, for the absence, for the man we both missed in different ways. The rain started against the window, gentle, like fingertips on glass. The house grew smaller in sound, quieter, like it too had stopped to listen. When he looked up at me, the paper trembling just slightly in his hand, he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He had walked into a memory that didn't belong to him, but now somehow it did. When our eyes met, something changed. There was a softness there, something warm and young that hasn't surfaced in years. Not an obligation. Not that polite distance that often lined his voice when he asked, "You doing okay, Ma?" This was different. It was as if he saw me again, not as someone he was responsible for, but as someone he came from. I saw his eyes land on my hands, wrinkled now, folded in my lap, the same hands that had once buttoned his shirts and picked gravel from his scraped knees. And I saw him remember. Just briefly, just long enough. He shifted on his feet, one shoe creaking the old wood floor beneath us. The clock ticked above the fireplace, slow and loud, as if even time had paused to notice. I smiled, just slightly. He didn't smile back. Not right away, but something behind his eyes softened, and in that quiet, without any words exchanged, I was his mother again. Not the background noise, not the wait in the guest room, just Mom. And that was everything. He sat beside me at the dining table, the letters laid out like petals between us, each one yellowed and curled at the edges, each one written in Henry's unmistakable loop. Did Dad really write one every week? He asked. I nodded. He said his thoughts behaved better on paper than out loud. My son gave a small smile. The kind you give when something beautiful surprises you. He told me stories about them. I continued. Some were silly, some were confessions, some were just about the tomatoes in the garden. Why did you keep them all? I looked at the letters and traced the corner of one with my finger. because they reminded me that I was still in someone's home. He sat with that for a while. A candle flickered behind us on the shelf, casting a gentle glow on the table. The room felt warmer now, not because of the air, but because of something settling, something mending. "I wish I'd known he did that," my son said quietly. "You were little. I didn't think you needed to." "Maybe I did," he whispered. He picked up a letter and turned it over like it might answer a question he hadn't asked yet. And for once, I didn't fill the silence. I let it live. Because sometimes it's not the answers that matter. It's what someone finally asked. He stood slowly, gathering the letters back into a gentle stack. His fingers trembled slightly as he tied the ribbon again, messier than Henry ever did, but still careful, still trying. Then, before he left the room, he turned back. He didn't say much, just placed his hand on mine. "I forgot who you were to me," he said, "but Dad didn't." My throat tightened so fast I couldn't speak. He didn't wait for me to. Just gave my hand one firm squeeze and walked toward the hallway. His shadow stretched long across the floor and then faded as he turned the corner. The rain had slowed to a hush. Outside, a street lamp flickered on. Inside, I sat with the glow of that single moment. Not a grand repair, not a perfect reunion, but a beginning, and that was enough. If my story touched your heart, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe. I'll be here every day, sharing more stories just for you. Thank you, my dear.